So I'd like to welcome you all to number 111 of the Circle of Wine Writers Let's Talk series. And today's topic is Old World, New World, What in the World with Nick Mills. Welcome to those joining for the first time and also to our non-members. The Circle was founded in 1960 in the UK and today has 270 plus members, comprising of wine educators, wine writers, broadcasters, and other professional communicators. Our membership is now global with a 50-50 split between the UK and overseas. There's more information about the Circle on our website and also details if you wish to join online. I'd now like to hand over to Rosemary George, our Honorary President, who will introduce our speaker today. Over to you, Rosemary.
Thank you, Andrea. Well, I'm thrilled to introduce Nick today. I first went to Ripon on my very first vineyard my first visit to New Zealand back in 1991, when Nick's parents were the sort of pioneers of winemaking on Lake Wanaka, a wonderful vineyard site. And at that time, it was not really clear that Pinot Noir was going to be the grape variety. I remember Rolf giving me something to taste called Oststeiner, which I never come across and haven't come across since. But this was the experimental, nature of the time, that time in New Zealand, back in the early 90s. So Nick has spent 4 years in Burgundy with an impressive CV of the various states he's worked for. I'm not going to give you a list. And then came back to take over winemaking at Ripon full time in 2003. And I can only say he's taken the quality of the wines of Ripon, and in particular Pinot Noir, to new heights and converted the vineyards into biodynamic viticulture. And as we are about to find out, he has quite an original take on the world of wine. So, Nick, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rosemary. And thanks, Michelle and Liz and Andrea, also just for the inviting me along and setting this up. What amazing technology that we've got that I can actually communicate with you all from the other side of the world. Here we're in the middle of a beautiful, brilliant summer, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. The vines are loving it, and so are we. I can just give you a little bit of context about where we are. I think it's probably the best thing just to start with, but and then maybe move into some themes, as Rosemary's alluded to, with regards to just some ideas about wine communication and how we see it from a production point of view. And so just in terms of context, if we roll straight into that, I'm just going to share my screen for a second. At some stage, there was a big boom and an explosion somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and matter started spinning out into a vacuum and accelerated away, and a molten ball of rock was formed, and it was right next to its sole source of energy, and it stayed molten for a long time. Can you hear me? Sorry, I heard someone speak. Was that?
Yeah, sorry, it's okay. I've muted. It's okay.
Okay, thank you. And as it drifted away, it started to get a crust of rock on the outside, but very shortly after that, a big, like Venus-sized block of rock hit it, and it belched a whole lot of magma out into space, and that quickly coalesced into what we know as the moon. But it was so close at that point, it was rolling around and pulling up a bulge of the magma of the Earth, that it couldn't form that crust anymore, and it stayed liquid like that until the moon over millions of years, billions of years, moved away. And as that formed, the light stuff went to the top and the heavy stuff went to the bottom. Gases and liquids came to the top, and metals and what have you went down, and that crust was formed. It was 1.8 billion years between the first microflora, when carbon started to self-replicate, and 1.8 billion years later, roots went down, vinifera amongst it. Simple plant forms went down and started getting nutrition out of that rock. It's just like a coat of paint on a basketball. It's essentially just a thin film of life on the outside of this ball spinning around in a vacuum. And the plants, because they came along a lot later, they weren't getting their nutrition from the rock. They were getting it from all of the byproducts of all of the microflora of the soil that had been there for billions of years before them. I'm telling you that story just because it's essential to understand viticulture and how we appreciate it and how we understand it. Telling you that also just to give you an idea about where we stand in this place. This is, of course, New Zealand right here that you're looking at. It's out in the middle of the ocean. So if you were to look at, say, Google Earth, you can look at Google Earth and that's our planet. Would you believe it? You look at it from a certain aspect and it's completely blue. It's a blue planet. That's the Pacific Ocean. You can't even see any other land on it. That's a third of the whole of surface of the Earth is that ocean, and way down in the bottom, kind of right out in the middle of it, is New Zealand. So it's a different place to what we're used to for what some are used to anyway, but that's where we're from, down there. Some time into that, you know, basically the Western Plate, which Australia is sitting on, went down, subducted, and the Pacific Plate that's sitting out there to the right of this picture, orogeny, had some uplift, and you can see that the main divide, the snowy Alps that run right down the middle of the South Island there, are the fault line between those two plates. You can see the whole country is maritime. It's a maritime country. You know, it's affected by the earth. However, down in Central Otago, oops, sorry, I don't know why that's moving. Down in Central, in this brown part down below, you can see that it's protected from the west. Okay, so as the weather systems come in from the Pacific, they move across from the left to the right of the screen, and you can see, as I said, everything else is green, but down there, that little brown bit down the bottom left there, that's Central Otago. It's protected from these 3,000 meter peaks that come straight out of the ocean. They come across there and they dry out the further they go to the right, the further they go east. So New Zealand's hottest and coldest and driest place. Many of you will know about Central Otago, but it's within that zone there. Where we are, these two little lakes that you see, this is Lake Wanaka right here, and that's where we are. We're the closest to the main divide. That means we're a little bit more temperate. We're not as hot or as dry as the rest of our region. Everything that came here over the years either had to fly here or swim here or float here or take a ship here, more recently take a plane. But everything, so we had no land mammals, and all of the flora and fauna evolved accordingly. So yeah, it's a very unique biota because of that. Humans arrived in our area about 700 to 900 years ago. Māori, they came down and they were mostly on the east coast, and they came up into Wanaka, into the hinterland, mostly in summer. And Wanaka, the name of our town, is a place of rest and education. That's to say, Wanaka means workshop or education. And so families used to stop there and garden, hunt, fish, gather, and mainly teach hunting, fishing, gather, and survival in that environment, but also genealogy and oral historical tradition. So it's a soft inland camp. It's really informative in terms of how we came there, but also the town and obviously also the viticulture as well. Yeah, fast forward quite a long time. Europeans started arriving in the 1700s, and by the 1800s, the treaty was about to be signed in 1850, and soon after that, the Wastelands Act came along, and the Wastelands Act was meant that any land that was unoccupied was open for land prospecting, and by that stage, there'd been a migration out of there, and also a raid by a Māori chieftain called Te Pūahu, who wiped out the local population, and so the land was open for land prospecting. Nathaniel Chalmers, John Turnbull Thompson, a surveyor, many different high country runs were established around that time. And in 1895, our great-grandfather Percy bought Wanaka Station. Oh, sorry, he went to the Brigato lectures. This was an Italian viticulturalist who was paid by the New Zealand government to go around New Zealand and investigate the potential for viticulture. And he gave a lecture to the Dunedin Chamber of Commerce at that time. In 1895, our great-grandfather attended that and understood the potential for viticulture in Central Otago. And in 17 years later, in 1912, he bought Wanaka Station, which was our farm. Yeah, it's a beautiful piece of land. It really is. This is the third generation on the farm. Rolf Mills, our dad, probably a little bit before when Rosemary visited, but not long before. In the early 70s. Yeah, Percy was his grandmother was Rippon. Her name was Emma Rippon, and the name Rippon came through our family from that from through the Sargoods, and Dad, who grew up on the farm, he at that time it was a very isolated high country run. That's to say, you couldn't get diesel up there. The whole place was run by horses. 80% of the arable land was just farmed for feeding the horses, for running the tractors, essentially the living tractors. Crazy idea, but it's a isolated, self-sustaining farm unit. That's to say, had its own cook shop. Really, no one knew what would grow up there at that stage, due to its isolation, and it was really the first farming that was ever done on that piece of land. And so there was mixed crops, animals, different animals, definitely gardens, orchards, inventive ways of using water for water wheels and grinding grain for electricity as well, siphon systems, a live-in cook shop, the cook shop where had two cooks that lived there, and the whole farm, the whole community would come together and eat and then go back out onto the farm. So you had this idea of a self-sustaining farm unit right from the beginning, and also this idea of pastoralism, trying to find the potential of a piece of land for any type of culture. And Rolf, Dad, grew up in that milieu, trying to understand what that potential of the land might be. And so he'd been coming out to where he's standing right here since he was a young boy, and looking at this piece of land and trying to imagine what the potential was of it. And yeah, some lovely stories came out of that. They were a family that had wine on the table, which was very rare for that generation. Dad was born in 1923, so that was in the 30s. We had Prohibition and Depression at that time as well, but they did have wine on the table. Probably colonial era sort of English trade items of claret and port and those sorts of wines. And he went off to the Second World War in the submarines. He was in the submarines in the Second World War. Came back to New Zealand via Portugal and saw the vines and the schist soils, and that sparked his interest in the potential. He did, obviously. Now we have to assume, knowing that Percy went to the Brigato lectures, that his grandfather probably told him of the potential. Dad died in 2000, so we were never able to ask him that. And we only found the letter from our great grandfather to his father about the Brigato lectures. Lois, my mother, only found that a couple of years ago. So we don't know. It's a little bit of a supposition that we think that probably Rolf had heard about the potential through that as well. Anyway, he started planting, and here's to Rosemary's point. Everyone said nothing would work. There was a regression by that stage in belief of our region. Certainly, the successful regions were dominated by the Dalmatians and Croatian. This is Auckland, Hawke's Bay, Gisborne, very maritime culture, very maritime climes. This is, obviously mountainous. These are 3,000 meter peaks sitting right in front of us, glaciated peaks. And by that stage, there were government warnings not to plant. So Dad, but he'd been watching it his whole life. He believed it could happen, so he planted out all of the varieties he could find. He had a selection of about 25, 30 different varieties for everything he could find around New Zealand. And over the next 3 decades, we took cuttings from our own nurseries, put them through, again, our own nurseries, selected down, nacelle selection from an original clonal stock down to the material that we've got there today. So yes, we've still got Ostana, Rosemary. We've got a bunch of other stuff as well, but mainly, you know, Pinot Noir, Riesling, Gewurz floated to the surface. And what it means now is you know, all the vines have been there, organic pretty much since the inception, and own rooted, pre-phylloxera, and mainly the most important legacy of that is that all of the plant material there is selected for the site. We didn't fall in love with Burgundy and go around trying to find a piece of land where we could emulate that culture, which has been successfully done down here and elsewhere, and brilliantly done by some of our friends and colleagues down here. But for us, it was a long-standing relationship with a piece of land and then an adaptation of the culture to that land. And so the fact that it's Pinot Noir and Riesling is because the material that's most comfortable there. That's to say, the fruit that didn't need pushing or pulling, it didn't need adjustments and must. So yeah, that's basically the legacy of our farmers, that we've got these mature vines on their own roots, unirrigated, biodynamically farmed, organic pretty much since the inception, and mainly comfortable in their environment, so they don't need adjustments and must. They're very, very, issues very, very balanced fruit. So they can be very naturally made. Dad died in 2000. My mother, as she saw this is back in the 80s, as she saw the garage filling up with wine, with no brand or anything to sell it by, created the business, and she's still very much here. She created the business, and Rosemary and others may remember her early trips to the UK and abroad, selling our wines. I came home as the bio said, back in 2002, and I was shortly joined by my 2 sisters, my wife, my brother, and about 4 or 5 full-time team, and we've been in that zone for about 15, 20 years now. Things have changed a little bit out of COVID, but that's basically where we are, and we're 4th going on 5th generation on the farm, just trying to look after it and trying to you know, do right by it, and hopefully bring it back to something to where the land, the habitat, back to where it was before humans arrived, which is a mammoth task in habitat restoration and planting out natives and trying to sink ourselves back into the land. It's a farm individuality, a farm individual. There we go. That's a little bit of a before after shot, if you like, of that same image. Yeah, in 2012, some time ago, we celebrated 100 years on the land and 30 years of wine growing. That's when we did that image. This is kind of where we are now. Oh, just to tell you a bit about mountains. But so here we are at Ripon, and this shot's a few years ago now, but it's relatively recent. It's a farm individual. That's to say, it has its own Ripon for us. Yes, it's a brand. Yes, it's a wine, but mainly it's an individual with which we maintain a relationship. It's a very well defined piece of land. It's a hill, and it's a roche moutonné, like any of these hills further up the valley. These ones here, these are hard pieces of rock that the ancient glaciers slid over, and Ripon here is one of them as well. With these north-facing ejection cones of schist gravels, where Tinkersfield and Emma's Block are down below here. All of our fruit comes from this place. Everything we do is here. We make 50 cubic meters of compost from our own manure herd, and all of the organic matter off the whole property. Everything we do is on site. And you know, like, as I say, that individuality, that identity is for us like another seat at the table. It's, you know, in a decision-making process, we might say, you know, what would Ripon ask of us in this situation? It's giving it some animacy, if you like. It doesn't need to be spirituality. It could be for certain of our family, but it's more for me just giving it a life force, if you like. And I guess New Zealand is unique in that as we were the first people to give the Whanganui River up in the North Island its own legal right as an entity, as an individual, the same as a human individual, and we have this notion borrowed from Māori of Wairoa, which is the spirit of a place, is essentially that the place has its own individuality, its own sense of self. And that's how we farm the land. And yeah, I guess that's the background and a little bit of context, and just moving into where that takes me and my experiences, I haven't grown up there, and giving you some thoughts and ideas, and perhaps even a challenge to you in terms of how we see wine and how we farm wine. I mean, it would be great to show you around and have a little bit more time and do this rather than having a dry conversation as we are right now. Talk about the wine and glass and on site. And please, if you ever, I know some of you have been out to us, but do come and see us. But short of that, I'll try and give you 2 or 3 ideas about how we farm and why we farm in that way. I guess the first is the purpose of fruit. For us, fruit has 2 different reasons to be. The first is the color, the flavor, the skins, the sugar. This is the attraction factor. This is what brings a bird along to eat the grape and then spread its seed. So this is the same in wine as the color, the flavor, the sugar, therefore the alcohol and the aromatics and the smells. Again, the attraction factor, that's what brings us to wine. But in terms of identity, the seed is all the material, genetic information that a vine can take from its place and issue into its prospective progeny, into its seed, into its reproductive organs, so it can be then successful in that same place. You can't taste or smell a seed. It's a texture, it's a shape, it's a feel, it's a tannin. I would say the same thing about the dry matter, the cell walls of the skins, probably the amino acids of the yeast as well, which all come out of the forests and indigenous to our place as well. All that material isn't something that you smell or taste. It's a texture, it's a feel. And you know this from your classical reference points of, say, Burgundy, is the difference between Vosne Romanée and Nuits Saint-Georges, for example, isn't cherries and plums. It's shape and feel and form. And so that's really a large part of our craft, and where we drive it to is trying to generate as much energy into that dry matter through compost, through biodynamic preparations, through our own work. And we've got, mature vines on their own roots, unirrigated, which again generates a lot of energy into that material. Once we have that material, and this is the sort of stuff that you can chew a whole bunch and get seed and get tannins in the fruit and chew it and get saliva and swallow the whole bunch. Once if you get to a point where you're granted that sort of material, that opportunity, then you can willingly extract all of that material into the wine without having to find it out later. It's digestive. It's something that's not astringent. It's something that can be extracted willingly and not be pokey or sharp or something sitting out from the wine. And that you can do that in reds, obviously. In whites, you might not want to skin soak it, but you can still crush it underfoot and soak it for pre-fermentation. So through enzymatic action, you're starting to break down some of the that matter as well. You use obviously wild ferments, indigenous yeasts. You put the whites in tanks that are on their side or barrels. A lot of lees to wine ratio. You let it go through a temperature spike. At temperature, you're going to autolyze more of those dry matter, more of that amino acids into the wine, and create texture and umami and salivaceous sort of feel to it, and line and direction and logical journey in the wines. And you could leave it on primary lees unsulfured for a period of time to again autolyze and metabolize all of that material, solubilize that material into the wine. So this is this is how we grow, make our wines. These are wines that are much more about texture and shape than they are about smells and flavors, and I encourage, and that's how I look at them. And there are wines like that. And so for me, I think the smells and the flavors are a very important part of the wine, but they're ephemeral, they're moving, they're mobile, they're volatile. Certainly, they're also subjective. They're also changing in bottle and in glass the whole time. So so for me, hanging out in terms of our identity, and the identity of our wines, we're much more drawn to their shape and feel. And those of you that know our wines hopefully will know those markers, but I can tell you pretty, just as an overview, because of our proximity to the main divide, which you can see right there in the background. That's the line, the glaciated line that separates east from west. We're the closest to that. The further you go down the valley, you're going to get higher diurnal range and more mass and flesh in the wines. Where we are, it's much more about precision, detail, articulation of tannins. Because we're on schist, any power that we have is through compression and dry, the like foliated, layered sort of feel to the tannins. All power, as I say, is not in mass and volume. It's in precision, detail, compressed power. And then, there's several different sites on the property that show different aspects of that as well. Emma's Block, Tinkersfield, the Ripon as well, as a farm voice as a whole. So that's one idea, and does maybe encourage wine communicators to think perhaps a little bit differently about certain wines. There are wines that it's not about texture; it's much more about the aromatics. These are wines perhaps made with under cold temperatures with singular aromatic style yeast strains and taken off lees immediately. And no skin soaking, just pressed straight out. They're interesting wines. They're entertaining, but do they have an identity? Do they have a clear voice of place? I'm less sure. Universal. That's a little bit of that purpose of fruit idea. The next one would be universality of craft. It's a bit of a mouthful. It's just the universal nature of what we do. If you believe in growing the soil, a compost, growing the soil, a life, putting a life back into the land every year, and trying to allow the vine to exist in what its true form is. It's a forest floor plant, it's a forest edge plant, so it wants to have its roots in forest style soils, and its head up in the light on the top of the canopy. It's a liane. So if you believe in growing a soil in that way and issuing plant material from that, encouraging that out into its reproductive part, it's all taking those the fruit and putting those through a natural secondary process, and issuing that, guiding that through that process is respectfully, let's say, not changing it, not pushing it around into an inert vessel that can be shipped around the world and then poured out into another inert vessel and then put directly into the bloodstream, into the digestive system and a bloodstream of someone on the other side of the world. If you believe in that craft, from soil all the way through to returning through the human body, that's universal. That doesn't have national boundaries. It doesn't have continental boundaries. It doesn't have cultural boundaries. It's universal, and it's been happening for long enough now. Grapevines evolved in Transcaucasia, Eastern Anatolia, elsewhere as well. We understand now, went east and west and came with humans. We were bipeds by that stage. We weren't monkeys going up into the top of the trees and eating it with the birds. We were propagating it at our own height. And wherever we went, it went, and so we feel comfortable in the same place. And where we are north facing, where you are in the northern hemisphere, south facing, looking towards the sun, the protection of a hill behind us, so we're midway through the slope, looking out across a landscape, protected in our case by the mountains, the lake giving succulence and temperance to our environment. All of those things that we feel good, and everyone says, oh, it's the most photographed vineyard or the most beautiful. All of those things are what make the vines comfortable in our place. and there's a clear relation between those. We feel comfortable in those same places. If you stand in Muzini, if you stand in La Hominy Conti, you feel good. You know it. You feel it's right. It's where humans feel good. All of the most expensive real estate in Burgundy is competing for the most expensive sites, and where all the Grand Crus are on that mid slope side as well. So it's the same thing. So we feel comfortable in the same place. It's a universal craft. I would say this is where I go into the idea of old world and new world is increasingly unhelpful, in the sense that okay, Australia has some of the oldest rocks on the planet geologically. It has rock formations that were bent by the moon when it was closer, when it was formed. It's that old. It has the longest single existing culture in the world, 60,000 years, the Aboriginal people. Never mind South Africa. South America, New Zealand. Oh, sorry, that's culturally speaking. The Pacifica was colonized by using navigation of the stars, a third of the size of the planet, when Europe still thought that the world was flat. It's a gross injustice, I think, to if it meant nothing, if it held no weight to those words, it would matter less. But as we know, old world and new world, it does have a weight. It does have a prejudice. For both sides, I should say. Old world, musty, whatever you think of that. Like when people talk about contemporary ideas of what that means in the glass. Hopefully that's changing. And I've heard Master Sommelier, this Master Sommelier Guild, and I know I've heard Jancis talking about it as well. That we have to move away from those. But also even Southern Hemisphere and Northern Hemisphere, I still have times where lists are written according to Southern Hemisphere, and that there is no such thing as the equator. I have the story of Dad, my father, when he was in the Navy. He was going out across the Pacific with a whole lot of 19-year-old kids off to the San Francisco, where they took the train across to New York and got in the ships on that side. And as they're going across the Pacific, all of the officers were like, "On the gunnels, boys!" And they went out there and they sat there looking for the equator for a couple of days, and it actually wasn't there. It doesn't exist. We're in a molten ball of rock spinning around in a vacuum. Our medium is vertical. Our horizon is vertical between soils and the life living in it, and the reproductive organs of the vines that are sitting on the top of it. That's the line, not this when it comes to viticulture. I'd also say that injustice to our cultures on that, but also just nowadays from wines. South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, South America have pre-phylloxera vines that have been on their own roots and unirrigated. They are part of that land, a single organism, and they have been part of that for many, many years. The wines that are produced now, I struggle to, or I challenge people to tell them apart in that. And this isn't me, certainly hating on wines from France, Italy, Spain, or in Georgia or anywhere else. Of course, these are it's quite the opposite, actually. It's out of respect for what I've learned and over there, that I talk about this, because we've had an exchange through a Burgundy Central Otago exchange now going for 20 years, where we send stagiaires in both directions. And the balance, the beauty of it is its balance, is that as much as New Zealanders, Central Otago stagiaires have got to learn from the overlay of socio-political overlays of Catholic orders, Cistercians and Benedictines and aristocracy and appellation systems and hierarchization of those appellation systems, and then Napoleonic inheritance laws, and now UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and generations of learning from daughter to son to father, to moving over and over and over. That is beautiful. We learn from that, but there's also a constriction to that, and we see that the people that come out, and as the stages that come out and see what it's like to be in a zone that's pre-Cistercian, pre-Benedictine, when it's just you have a piece of land and you can have a relationship with it, an open relationship with it, and you're under your own terms, and you see what the benefit of that does to people. So we have things that we can teach and learn from each other. So from a production point of view, we just don't see those constrictions. And I understand that wine needs reference points, and it does need some lines around it to give readership, to people, and to try and understand Te Awa. But we have to come up with new ways of communicating that, I believe. And finally, before question time, I see wine as Wendell Berry. Some of you might have heard his or read his writings. He's a North American poet, activist, writer. He's one of his things that he's often quoted for is saying that eating is an agricultural act, and I take that, and I believe that, and I take that and say that drinking wine is indeed an agricultural act. That's to say, the act of making a purchase decision, buying a wine, and putting that into your body has an impact on a piece of land somewhere, however small. It's an important, essential piece of impact. And that brings me to think that wine, wherever it is, that we need to start communicating in a way that that reflects that. We know that most wine is bought because it has a red sticker on it. Impulse bought, the science tells us this, off a supermarket shelf, red or a silver or gold sticker, mostly a red one. It's price point orientated. And that's I don't, to some degree, but there's something more important afoot here, and that's that land and land security is under massive threat right now around the world, and we know this, and we feel like we're useless and we can't do anything about that. But there are things we can do. We can communicate that that purchase decision does have an impact on a piece of land somewhere. It's not. Oh, we've just done in Central Otago. We've just done a study on how we can get from 30% of all of our land, our vineyard land area, from 30% organics, certified organics, to 50%. Back in pre-2020s, New Zealand wine growers asked us to try and have a goal of getting to 20% organically certified, or by 2020. Central Otago was the only region that got to that. We got to 23%, and since we've got up to 30%. How do we get that next 20% to 51%? I think it's 51. By the time we get to 51, I think there's going to be a collapse, and I think it's the only way to go. It's a blunt tool. Organics isn't the only answer. There's carbon. There's all sorts of there's social issues. There's things that need to happen at that same time, rather than just what you do and don't put on your land. And certification, whilst it works, is very blunt. It's just a badge that sits on the back label of some, and not on all. But it is for me a kind of a minimum bottom line. So how do we do that? And we did this study, and what came out of that study was frighteningly to get not enough people care. The consumer just don't care about it. And that was the reason why the next people, the people that are just, you know, trying to get across, or looking at getting across the line in organics, aren't, because there isn't enough pull from the consumer. And so this is down to us. This is down to wine communicators. It's the people that we're talking with that we're in this room right now with. It's wine isn't just about about flavors. It's not just about points. It's not just about prestige. All those things are really important. All those things are important. It's not even just about texture, which is what I believe in wine and what I love about wine, about how it feels and how it makes me feel. But it's actually about an agricultural a pursuit, and it's actually about the security of a piece of land. And this piece of land here that we're looking at is a beautiful, beautiful piece of land. I can't tell you that, hand on heart, that that's the best thing for this land. It probably wants to become a forest if it had its own choice, you know. But it's an organic piece of land. It's a biodynamic piece of land. It has its own cows. We try and get every piece of aspect, square meter of it that doesn't need to be viticulture for us to be able to stay there, back to allow it to go back to restore back to where it once was. And you know, it's not just us, you know, like I don't necessarily know what the you know, it's a challenge, I think, for you as communicators to find out what the those aspects of land is that people might warm to, that might people find an attachment and identify with. It might not just be organics. It might be biodynamics. It might be social aspects about how that vineyard or how that business connects with a community. It may be yeah, again, habitat restoration. It may be carbon. You know, how do we sequester more carbon back into the soil? There's all of these things, but when we review and we talk about a wine, I challenge you not just to talk about points and flavors, but what that wine contributes back to its land. And I asked you to do that now, because we don't have a lot of time for our farm. You know, it's a very, very difficult thing to hold on to a piece of land, you know, and succession is the hardest piece of. We've been there going on 5 generations, as I say, but that doesn't mean it's easy. It's the hardest single thing an agriculturalist, a farmer will do is, you know, you have to make the land viable so that the next generation takes it on. It's not just about running a business that can then sell wine and make money from it. It's about looking after it. You know, vines last and land lasts way longer than single human generation. It lasts, it perpetuates over multiple generations. So we need to secure it in those terms. And I know you know, family businesses and other businesses besides will echo those thoughts with me. They're my thoughts and some challenges for you guys. Happy to take questions and on any of that. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Nick. I think what a fascinating talk you've given to everybody here today. I think out of 111, I've never quite heard anything like it. We have a number of questions here, and our first is our chairman, Meg Maker. Meg, if you'd like to unmute yourself and give your question to Nick.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. That was fascinating. I really feel privileged to sort of see inside your mind and your philosophy, and also photos of your extraordinary land. I guess my question is, it's not really meant as a challenge, but it's a question I ask a lot of growers who have a holistic mindset about agriculture, which you seem to, which is that how do you reconcile? You partly answered this in your talk, saying that your vineyard would probably go back to a forest if it, you know, given its own way. But how do you reconcile, you know, monoculture, grape monoculture, with your personal philosophy of holism and universality and the integrity of a diversified ecosystem?
Thank you, Meg. With difficulty, I have to say, I have this image in my head of what this land looked like and I didn't know it from the pollen records. And I mean, down closer to the lake here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but just here where the arrow is, there's a nursery that we started with the community called Te Kakono. It means the seed, and with community work, we take seeds from up these gullies here and on these islands, remnant forest stands from before when humans were here, and we propagate out genetic material, and then with community work, put them down along the riparian margins and down the gullies. This is what you're looking and try and restore that. But what you're looking at here is a beautiful landscape, but is a denuded landscape. There were Aleria forests, there were totara forests and podocarp forests up these gullies. So I look at this, I try and take myself back into that space, and from from before the treaty, perhaps before when even humans arrived here, and try and imagine what that was like, with moa and the Haast eagle floating around, and the biota that was around there. And I try and say, what would we really want? What do we need, and what do we not need to alter here if we could have that choice again? And that's really was the intention of the treaty, but unfortunately it didn't. European farming had a different aspect than what Māori believed, I guess. But if we were only to take out, in our instance, the vineyard, if we're just if we were able to just take the vineyard and put the vineyard into that forest and put the winery in, and the carbon that was there, I'd say carbon, but as a simple element. But imagine the biota, the life, if we were able to allow that to self-sustain itself, I think it would have been a lot better. And so I try and project that forward and say, okay, it's going to take a lot longer for us to reestablish that, and some things we won't be able to reestablish. The moa and the Haast eagle are long gone. But trying to, with that vision, trying to move forward. So we and try and maybe in 200 years see that's what it ends up with. I have to acknowledge my own privilege in that. Our family came out from the UK in the late 1700s to Australia, and our wealth came from gold. We were merchants in the gold mining times, and so the merchants made the money, and our great grandfather, who was the grandson of that original generation, was able to purchase this piece of land, and that's really the sale of that land was what enabled our family to raise the capital to do this audacious thing, as growing grapes in the middle of this place. We're at a time when everyone said nothing would work, and we didn't have investors or anything like that. So it was all raised on the capital was raised on land sales and that wealth came from somewhere else, and it came from digging holes. So I have to acknowledge and acknowledge that privilege as well. However, moving forward, the only way I can. Otherwise, I end up in a hole. To your point, Meg, is like I think farming, ever since we became, you read Harari, Sapiens, ever since we became agriculturalists 60,000 years ago, whenever you put the date in, we did that by taking energy from resource from somewhere else. So so we could exist in a singular place rather than moving and being hunter-gatherers. To stay in one place, we had to take energy from somewhere else. So that's what we are as farmers, and I don't think I can change that. Not in my lifetime. But I can at least as a farmer, I can actually try and create some flesh and actually move back into a place where I can feel more comfortable.
Thank you. That was a fantastic answer. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. And Trevor, you had a question for Nick?
Yes, hi, Nick. Fascinating. Thank you. I visited your place in 2018, and of course, the visual impact of the lake is extraordinary. It's breathtaking, just like this photograph. My question is, when I think about Central Otago, there are prize vineyards like yours near the various lakes, and there are many others which are not. They're landlocked. What difference does it make, and will that difference, if it exists, change with future climate change, do you think?
Good question. Thank you. I'll just go back to this is an interesting one. The main part of our climate is not really driven by the lakes, although that is an important one. Is that again, if you see my cursor, this is the main divide here. So this is separating east from west. If we go back to the one before, it's the same line as this white one here. So, you know, 5 to 10 meters of rain falls on this ridge here. You know, the air mass that arrives from the west has never hit land. Maybe Patagonia on the other side of the world. You know, so it's a lot of velocity and moisture holding capacity. So it comes across there, hits these 3 to 4,000 meter peaks, dumps all of its moisture and dries out as it comes out onto this side, onto the east side. And so it gets hotter, colder, drier as it moves down this way. Alexandra, which is about here, which is the center of Central Otago, you can see it's the most inland part of the South Island and New Zealand. You know, it's protected from the south, it's protected from the east, mainly it's protected from the west. This is New Zealand's hottest and coldest and driest place. It's a semi-arid place down here. Where we are, we're right up against the main divide. So this is what we're the most temperate, because we're not as hot or as cold as dry as the rest of the region. So that's the most important macro drive, you know, the driving factor of what we're talking about in Central Otago. Obviously, Gibbston, you're drawing air from a cooler air mass from deeper valleys from the southwest, which comes in and meets it in this direction. And you can see it in this in the data. You know, the further you get away from that main divide, we're right where the W of the Wanaka is. We're right on the cusp of that rain shadow. So you can see even from there as it gets red down and Bendigo, Bannockburn, Alexandra, all in that red further down to the southeast. So we are in a much more temperate climate because of that. That's dry summer rainfall that you've got there. Most of our rainfall's in winter, but that's just you can see how that works. The lakes, yeah, well, our lake changes 2 degrees from summer to winter, at least the core temperature, maybe 3 degrees. That's the core temperature. The top warms up a lot, but that does mean it warms things up on a cold night and cools things down on a hot day. It is a temperance device. So there is, and you know, there is a katabatic, anabatic, you know, lake effect that's going on during the day, which does cool things down. So yeah, there is an aspect to that. I can't really comment too much on what it means to not be next to one of those, but obviously it's a thermal mass, a temperance device essentially. In terms of in terms of climate change, look, we are still, even though we're in a continental climate, we're, as you see, we're like a plume of fresh air sitting outside, sitting behind these mountains, in the middle of the largest mass of water on the planet. So, what does that make it? It's you know, in my experience, yes, the harvests have been getting earlier. There's no doubt about it. Although the last 2 or 3 have, like I think Burgundy, have gone back to some sort of stability. Like now we're back to harvesting in April rather than the end of March. These last few years, but I'm sure that will change. That's just temporary. But you know, where we are in viticulture, you have to understand this, is that when we pick our Pinot Noir, the season is over. When we pick our Riesling, the leaves have fallen. You know, there's nothing left in the season. So if our season shortens by 2 weeks, for example, in my lifetime, and where the mean, and that's, if we shorten 2 weeks, the planet has got some, and the mean amount, 2 or 3 weeks, we've got some serious issues globally. You know, at the moment, even if we shorten 2 weeks, we would be closer to Burgundy. You know, and this, I'm only using classical reference points for your understanding, because they are very different places. But that's to say, when we're picking, our leaves aren't green or vibrant anymore. they've denatured. They're not actually picking up any photosynthesis. They've slowed right down. They're all woody and hoary, and they're about to fall. So the season is done. So shortening our season for us at this, we're in between two walls anyway right now. So I don't think for us at this stage, this is me, and you know, that global warming, at least in as even though it's worst case scenario right now, can be seen as a is going to affect us negatively. Can I put it that way? I know it's going to affect us negatively in so many other ways already. But in terms of this, our viticulture and our style of wine, it's like our earliest ever picked was middle of March. There was 2018, 2 whole weeks before the next earliest. And even in 2018, we've got freshness. It's, you know, it's not blown out. We've still got detail and articulation in our wines. So yeah, I don't mean to sound irresponsible with that, because I know the dangers and the difficulties that we face as a planet right now. I'm absolutely aware of it, but in viticulture, I don't think it's going to affect us in the same way it might other places.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you, Nick. I think there's no other questions here at the moment. All I can see is a few members have made observations. Nick, Angela Lloyd from South Africa was saying that South Africa's been making wine since the 17th century, so hardly the New World, supporting what you were saying, I think, earlier. And Linda Simpson was saying that I believe and teach that wine should have a sense of place rather than identify as old, new, traditional, or modern. And Wink Law was saying there's no one better to explain a sense of place than those who work that piece of land itself. That's why I talk and write about the people behind the wines. They are the custodians, as we see here with Nick.
Oh, thank you.
I think on that note, I'll hand over to Rosemary to say thanks for everything today, Nick.
Sorry, try unmuting myself.
Okay.
Nick, thank you. That was wonderful. I mean, fascinating. Lots of food for thought. Thank you for sharing your enthusiasm, your commitment, your insights. The only thing that was missing was actually a glass of Ripon Pinot Noir. Thank you.
Yeah,
I wouldn't think bad if I say it's a very new, very old world style of Pinot Noir. You know, from your 4 years in Burgundy, something obviously rubbed off. So,
no, not at all. No,
Thank you so much. It's been
only
terrific.
respect of the land.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And yeah, it's 6 o'clock in the morning, but maybe I should have had a glass of wine as well.